Well, it turns out that the talks in Geneva aren't happening. They were called off at the last minute. We're going to get into the details of that and what's actually happening here. But here's the punchline. I'll give it to you right at the beginning of the video, and then we'll take a look. The punchline is that, sadly, the prediction that I've been making over the last week has come to be exactly as I predicted it. I said last Sunday, when Hezbollah attacked Israel with drones right after this deal was agreed to, and Israel retaliated by striking Beirut, and then Trump lashed out at the Israelis, lashed out at Bibi for retaliating against the Hezbollah drone attacks. Right? I said at the time, I made a video last week where I said, we always have to remember that Hezbollah is Iran. They're not a proxy like Hamas or the Houthis or Palestinian Islamic Jihad that get funding and weapons from Iran, and they function as a quote-unquote proxy. Hezbollah is owned and operated by, it is directed by the IRGC, by the regime in Tehran. They try to pretend that they're not, but that's what they are. What that means is that last Sunday, when Hezbollah launched drones at Israel, which led to Israel attacking Beirut, which led to Trump criticizing Israel, that was all orchestrated by Tehran. They tell Hezbollah to attack. They know Israel's doctrine is to respond, and then they end up in a win-win. Either Trump tells Israel to back off, and Israel backs off, and that's a win for Tehran. They were able to attack Israel with impunity. Or Israel doesn't back off, and Israel attacks anyway, and that drives a deeper rift, a deeper wedge between President Trump, between the Americans and the Israelis. Either way, it's a win. It's a win for the Iranian regime. And I also predicted during the course of the week that when this deal falls apart, the way it's going to fall apart is that the Iranians are going to direct Hezbollah to provoke the Israelis. They'll provoke the Israelis will retaliate. That retaliation will be viewed negatively by the Americans, and that's how it's going to go. And sure enough, here we are. It happened even faster than I thought, because we now have Israeli soldiers being killed in Lebanon. So let's get into that story, and then we'll move into what's happening with these negotiations or non-negotiations. It's all really one story. And I should also, so here we go. Here's the headline from this morning. 4-person IDF tank crew, including battalion chief, killed by Hezbollah in South Lebanon. Terrible. 5 soldiers hurt, including reservist officer who was seriously wounded in the same village hours later. IDF says Lebanon reports 18 killed, 33 hurt in Israeli strikes since midnight. 4 IDF soldiers were killed overnight in a Hezbollah attack in the southern village of Kfar Tebnit. The violence was the latest in deadly clashes between Israel and the Iran-backed terror group that have continued in Lebanon since the U.S. and Iran this week reached a memorandum of understanding that committed them and their allies to halt hostilities in the country. Israel, which is not party to the memorandum of understanding, has rebuffed Iranian demands that it withdraw from a buffer zone in South Lebanon meant to protect border towns against Hezbollah attacks. A U.S. official told Axios that Iranian anger over Israeli military activity there may be the reason U.S.-Iranian talks scheduled for Friday were canceled. In the Hezbollah attack shortly past midnight, a suspected drone or anti-tank missile struck the tank of Lieutenant Colonel Dor Gedalia Ben Simchon, commander of the 401st Armored Brigade's 52nd Battalion, killing all 4 crew members, the IDF said. Okay, and then it talks about the soldier a little bit. And yeah, the U.S. has avoided calling publicly for Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon, but U.S. President Donald Trump has called for a complete ceasefire and expressed mounting anger at Israel's actions in Lebanon. Israeli officials have railed against the Memorandum of Understanding for restricting Israel in Lebanon and for providing Iran with economic relief without any concrete concessions from Tehran on its nuclear program. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, in turn, lashed out at Israeli critics of the deal and of Trump in comments on Thursday. Go take a look at the video I just made. It's one of the most recent videos on this channel is about J.D. Vance and his comments. It's a must-watch. I mean, I made it so easy for me to say, but I really think it's one of the more important videos I've made. And I get into some of the claims that J.D. Vance made in those comments of his, in those what I found to be sort of obnoxious comments that he made. And that wasn't the only incident. IDF reserve soldier killed, 7 wounded by Hezbollah explosive in South Lebanon. These are 2 different events on the same day. Master Sergeant Alexander Filin, 29, who immigrated alone at age 12, later foiled an attack, got the Presidential Award. He was killed. Now, I want to say, before we go on, I just want to explain something that a lot of people who aren't familiar with what's been going on in Israel and the Middle East and our enemies for years. Ceasefires are actually very dangerous for us. It is whenever there's a ceasefire, Israelis get worried, not because we're not attacking anymore and we want to attack more. Soldiers get killed more during ceasefires. I know that sounds a little weird, but it's not, because when you're on the offensive, when we're on the offensive and you're moving and the rules of engagement are to eliminate threats as you go, your soldiers are much safer. In these ceasefire rules, and reports have come back, I've heard numerous credible reports from field officers in Lebanon over the last few days, even before the MOU was officially put into practice, but already once President Trump started lashing out at Israel for retaliating in Lebanon and telling them to tamp it down, apparently through the chain of command in the IDF, they already got new rules of engagement that greatly limited the ability to deal with threats in a timely manner. And that's what happens whenever there's a ceasefire. Our soldiers are more vulnerable because the rules of engagement favor the terrorists. Now, back to what's happening here in terms of the political dynamics. As I said in my opening, this is exactly what I predicted. The Iranians are instructing Hezbollah to continue to fire these explosive drones, to continue to attack our soldiers in Lebanon. This is provoking Israel. This is causing an escalation. Trump doesn't want an escalation. Also, because the opening clause of the Memorandum of Understanding calls on the United States and its allies to cease all hostilities. And it says that all of America's allies are signing on to this MOU, but Israel said, no, we didn't. The Iranians are claiming that this is a violation of the MOU. Okay, let's take a look at this story on the cancellation of the talks, and then we'll get into what Iranian state media is saying about it. U.S.-Iran talks in Switzerland abruptly called off as Israel and Hezbollah trade attacks in Lebanon. J.D. Vance's staff were at the airbase ready to fly to the summit in Bergenstock for Iran talks before the trip was suddenly canceled. The talks were set to begin in the Swiss village of Obergen 2 days after the signing of the MOU that opened a 60-day window to negotiate a permanent understanding over Iran's nuclear program while getting oil traffic moving through the Strait of Hormuz. The White House says that the U.S. looked forward to the beginning technical talks as soon as possible. The cancellation of the talks came as Israel and Hezbollah traded their most violent strikes since the ceasefire was established. Hezbollah targeted Israeli forces near the city of Nabatea in South Lebanon, with several salvos of rocket fire late on Thursday. After the intermittent Israeli shelling throughout the day, Israel responded with a wave of airstrikes on the city and surrounding towns on what it said were Hezbollah targets, leaving at least 18 dead and 33 wounded. Okay. Hezbollah said it was targeting Israeli forces which were trying to advance toward the foothills surrounding Nabatea. Listen, they're always looking for reasons to attack. And this is the problem. The cancellation of the talks between Iran and U.S. on Friday came so abruptly that Vance's staff and a small pack of journalists had even gathered at Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington in anticipation of the trip. They were already there was also staffers who were already in Switzerland. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, who may or may not be alive, said on Thursday that he had approved the MOU despite reservations. And yeah, so that's what's happening here. The Iranians blame the Israelis. The Iranians blame the Americans for the Israelis fighting in Lebanon, and that puts pressure on the Americans, who then put pressure on the Israelis, and this is all a lovely dynamic for the Iranians. Okay, let's take a look at how the Iranian state media is reporting this. Iran-U.S. talks in Switzerland canceled. So it starts off just with the details of the story. Here we go. Iran and the United States had been set to hold the first meeting of a 60-day negotiation period following their initial understanding with the aim of reaching a final agreement. Meanwhile, Lebanon's Al Mayadeen television network reported Thursday evening that Iran's negotiating delegation had suspended its trip to Switzerland in response to Israel's continued attacks on southern Lebanon. The report said that the Iranian delegation has been preparing for the trip to launch the first round of the 60-day talks. Tehran has warned that Israel's ongoing military operations up to 10 kilometers inside Lebanese territory constitute a clear violation of the first clause of the Memorandum of Understanding. Under the first clause of the 14-point Memorandum of Understanding reached between Tehran and Washington, both sides committed to ending all military operations across all fronts, including Lebanon. So why didn't Hezbollah stop? Remember, Hezbollah is Iran. So the Iranians play this lovely double game. Israel shouldn't be attacking. Israel's only attacking in retaliation for things that Hezbollah does. So they provoke Israel. Israel retaliates, and then the cycle, wash, rinse, repeat. And now here's a more analytical piece from WANA. As strikes continue in Lebanon, will Iran hold its leverage? This is the front page story in WANA today. If you take a look here, the front page story, as strikes continue in Lebanon, will Iran hold its leverage? And what are they saying in this? So it goes through how according to the first clause of the agreement, Israel is supposed to cease all activities in Lebanon. And look what it says down here. From this perspective, as long as there's no tangible progress on the Lebanon file and the conditions outlined in Clause 1 remain unmet, moving forward with negotiations on the final agreement will be difficult to reconcile with the framework and requirements of the deal itself. Iranian officials and members of the negotiating team have repeatedly stated in recent weeks that both the explicit provisions of the agreement and any potentially ambiguous areas subject to interpretation will be pursued in line with Iran's interest and those of the so-called axis of resistance, with no intention of retreating from those positions. This is an interesting word salad. Let me explain what it means, and I'll explain it by pulling up the Memorandum of Understanding. Okay, the MOU. Okay, let's pull it up here. Here's the Memorandum of Understanding. Clause 1. The United States of America and Islamic Republic of Iran and their allies in the current war, by signing this MOU, declare the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, and undertake from now on not to initiate any war or military operation against each other and to refrain from the threat or use of force against each other, and ensuring the now here we go. And ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. The final deal will confirm the permanent termination of the war on all fronts, including Lebanon, and other provisions of this paragraph. Now, and then in this piece, look at the sentence we just read. The sentence we just read said that Iranian officials and members of the negotiating team have said that that besides the explicit provisions of the agreement, any potentially ambiguous areas subject to interpretation will be pursued in line with Iran's interest and the interests of the axis of resistance. The axis of resistance is the nickname for the proxy network, okay? Which means that if you find something ambiguous in here, that could be, we're not sure which way it goes, and there's a lot of things like that in this deal. The Iranian position is that whatever serves the interests of us and our axis of resistance, that's going to be how we interpret that ambiguity, and we are not going to budge from those positions. One of the big ambiguities in this, and remember, this article is about Lebanon, and it's about Israel attacking in Lebanon, and then just throw this in here, and they don't say what the ambiguity is. You notice that? What's the point of this paragraph? Tell me the ambiguity you're referring to. Why do you even bring that up? What is the ambiguity? We know what it is. It's this line here. That because this is a commitment to stop all the fighting, right? Immediate permanent termination of military operations. We're not going to attack each other anymore. And something vague, ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. What does that mean? That is gobbledygook speak for Israel has to withdraw. Ensuring the territorial integrity of Lebanon. Territorial integrity of Lebanon? Lebanon's occupied by Hezbollah. They're officially a non-state actor that has an army in South Lebanon. Why do they talk about it as though it's legitimate? It's insane. What they're talking about here is Israel needing to withdraw. In other words, their predicate that they're setting is that Israel needs to withdraw from Lebanon, and That's what they're saying. That's the ambiguous thing. Effective implementation is viewed as critical because failure to fulfill the commitments could influence how the rest of it goes, of course. Now, there's a couple more paragraphs that we have to see here before we move on. Against this backdrop, there's a perception that Iran still retains a range of options. See, they do this all the time. One of the things I love about the Iranians is that when they put out the possibilities of what to expect next, they always give you a range of options. And it's part of their whole face-saving culture where they want to show you that they're outthinking you. So they give all the different options so that no matter what ends up happening, they can say, you see, we knew that already, or we told you so. So Iran has a range of options, but this is also a threat. These could include suspending or postponing future negotiations, reimposing restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz, or employing other deterrent measures if the agreement is not implemented as expected. A combination of these options is also possible. Within the same framework, a full opening of the Strait of Hormuz while Israeli attacks continue and the situation in Lebanon remains unresolved is viewed by proponents of this approach as potentially reducing existing sources of leverage. In other words, we can't open the Strait of Hormuz while Israel is still attacking Lebanon because that would reduce our leverage. Our leverage, us Iranians, the leverage is that we have the straits closed and we want you to stop attacking Hezbollah. Remember, they are deathly afraid of Hezbollah getting destroyed, Hezbollah getting disarmed, and of the Lebanese government making its own independent peace deal with Israel. That's what they're trying to prevent. So they're saying we cannot open the Strait of Hormuz while that's going on because then we've given up our leverage for nothing. That's what this paragraph means. It is also argued that if the agreement is to succeed, this is huge, Washington must play a more effective role in preventing the continuation of Israeli military operations. In other words, they're not blaming the Israelis, they're blaming the Americans. It's so effective. They're pointing at the Americans and saying, we can't trust you, we can't deal with you, you're not fulfilling the MOU. Because clause 1 of the MOU that you, the Americans, signed says that the Israelis have to stop attacking in Lebanon, and they're your proxy, they're your ally. You got to rein them in. It puts pressure on the Americans because now they don't, and then the Americans are like, why are you ruining our deal? That's the dynamic. So when you see J.D. Vance or President Trump lashing out at Israel, understand that they are literally doing exactly what the Iranians hoped they would do. They are literally like they're unwittingly playing the exact role the Iranians wanted them to play, and making themselves look like the stooges of Iran. This is what Iran's doing. Okay, and then look at this. Look at this. This is so cagey by the Iranians. Look at this headline. Cancellation of Iran talks pushes oil prices above $80. Now, because they had dropped below 80. They'd been well over 100 before, right? They dropped well below 80. And now, so what are the Iranians doing? They're saying, you see, remember, President Trump, your whole goal in this was to bring down oil prices. Well, now that the Israelis are attacking in Lebanon and you're not reining them in enough and we canceled the negotiations, well, you see, oil prices are rising. They're trying to get Trump to panic. And this headline was picked up by Anadolu, the Turkish media, who, of course, want to amplify it. Look at this. Let's read this. It's a short one. The cancellation of planned talks between Iran and the United States triggered a fresh rally in global oil markets, pushing Brent crude back above $80 per barrel. The oil market resumed its upward trend after the Iranian delegation announced that it would not attend Friday's negotiations in Switzerland because of continued attacks in Lebanon. Following these developments, Brent crude rose to $80 a barrel. Look at that. So that's where we are, folks. Exactly as I predicted it would be. I'm not saying this to crow and say, oh, I was right. That's not the point. My point is that what I'm giving you in these videos, what I'm giving you on this channel, what I'm trying to is to give you the ability to look downrange and see what is coming. And it is playing out exactly as we thought. Okay, the Iranians are playing this perfectly. President Trump and J.D. Vance are reacting to them perfectly, exactly as they expected. And as far as the Iranians are concerned, they don't necessarily have the full end game worked out. It's like in chess where they're anticipating the next 2-3 moves and they're working. So what they're doing is they're saying, look, what we're doing is working. The Americans are desperate to hold the deal together. Meanwhile, the Americans are wagging their finger at the Israelis, trying to get them to back off, which is wonderful. We have think about the Iranians. We have the Americans holding back the Israelis from destroying Hezbollah, from destroying our militia in Lebanon. Meanwhile, the Lebanese people, the Lebanese opposition to Hezbollah is livid right now. They hate this MOU. But they have this win-win going on where the Americans are doing their bidding, holding off Hezbollah. The Americans are panicking because they want their deal. And they're causing them to twist in the wind and doing what they always do, which is buy more time. As long as they, and they're just going to keep playing their game. So let's see where this goes. Listen, I also want to be, with all of this tense moment that we're in, the pro-Israel community has to be more level-headed, okay? The story is far from over. It's far from over. As you see from today's news, it's far from over. There's going to be ups and downs. There will be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps back, 1 step forward. It's going to go back and forth. Keep a level head. The story's far from over. Israel's still in a very strong position, and we just have to pray that our leaders make the right decisions. All right. Thanks for watching. God bless.